Good afternoon, Dr.
Good
Sri.
afternoon.
Thank you very much for accepting our invitation
Thank
from
you.
the South China Morning Post.
Good afternoon.
This is Bhavin.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sri, for sitting down with the South China Morning Post for this interview. What does it feel like to be a free man?
One can understand and appreciate the meaning of freedom when one compare with the experience of incarceration or unfreedom. In my case, I value it certainly much more than ordinary Malaysians, and I'm very passionate about it. I don't believe that one should, any authority, government included, political authority, should rob any man or woman of his or her freedom. Freedom entails you having to decide for yourself what to do, what to eat, where to walk, essentially what book to read. But in prison, all those have been denied to you because there are rules, and very rigid rules that will not enable you to do what you like and to say what you want and to express what you feel. And that is so dehumanizing. So, as I said, freedom is part of the human endeavor. It must be part of our way of life.
What was the most profound experience you had while in prison?
Profound, I wouldn't say profound, but I would say, well, you feel that you've lost everything. As I said, not only dehumanizing, but it's degrading, you know. You sense that what's important to you, your wife and your kids, or your grandkids in my case, are not there. They're all absent. Of course, I also understand that this part of the design and the conspiracy of those ruling clique in power, because by this sort of a political assassination and incarceration would embolden them, their strength, because then they would probably cut off one of the pillars of the opposition coalition. But having said all this, it's not all that gloomy, because what you decide to do. I made the decision that I would use these years in prison, fully utilize the time, have a very rigid regime of meditation and reading and writing, because that's what you do the whole day, and checking eyes and nose and teeth and whatever, you know, any single problem, you start complaining, so a doctor will have to look at you. You wouldn't have time to do that when you're outside. And you have to pay for it. And now you can manage. Then, so I read. I'm so fortunate, because friends all over the world, America, UK, Middle East, Hong Kong, they kept on sending me books, you see. So so with the moment I received these books, I consider it part of my homework. Oh my God, and the 10 books not read. I've started reading 5, another 10 comes. And so you read, and the advantage is that you read everything. My interest, of course, history, philosophy, there's Islamic, Chinese, Indian, novels. You go back to the classics. In fact, I even reread Journey to the West, Romance of the Ringing Kingdom, and trying to see the funny bits that I can fit into those jokers who are orchestrating. Is like what King Lear said to Cordelia, you know, in King Lear towards the end, to try and philosophize and what is the game in town by the political players, or Macbeth, and see is there any Lady Macbeth around that can fit in that story.
Was there a Lady Macbeth?
I think in any system there may be. It depends on the extent of their influence.
Would you care to share with us your assumption?
No, I'm quite civil in these things. But of course, there is a contention about how you reread Shakespeare, empathize with his genius, literary genius, and understanding it from the prism of prison walls. And it's of course different because you focus, there's no interruption except for the guards coming back and forth, and they normally ignore me or coming to a small lunch break. You call it lunch anyway. There's no tea break. But this, of course, is a great benefit. It's how you view life, how you rationalize your presence. You want to fight a system. You want to dismantle a corrupt order. It's not an easy feat, of course. I mean, you have to pay the price. Unfortunately, it's back to Anwar Ibrahim having to pay the price for far too long. So it's total of 10.5 years in prison. It's not short.
So who gave you the biggest inspiration in forging ahead?
To me, faith is important. I am a Muslim, and I try to aspire to become, a practicing one, and that to have faith. And of course, I'm a student of history. You see the tribulations, sufferings from the past to the present, to Gandhi, Mandela. All these things, of course, help, bits and pieces that give you this additional strength and motivation. And finally to realize, after all, however these tribulations, sufferings you have to endure, it is small compared to some. Look at Syria, they're just dead. They just disappear. In my case, I disappear physically, but I'm still relevant outside. They said, Mandela used to say that once, although they abuse you every time, all day long, or every night on the television network, you will realize that it is better for them to remember you than for you to be completely forgotten. As a political leader, even if they abuse you, you're still present. If they completely ignore you, then you have a problem.
This is what maybe your daughter meant when she told us some months ago that you are an irrepressible optimist.
Yes. Yeah, irrepressible, I would say incorrigible, because look at what happened. Nobody anticipated this. No studies, no analysts, no. Generally, people think even if you win, it's going to be a small margin. I was optimistic. I think we could win. Why? But simple calculation. In 2013, we garnered 52% of the popular vote. All right. But we went along. And the bigger scandals coming in. Massive corruption. Huge taxation. Then we have Mahathir. Suddenly, this Mahathir teaming up with Anwar. Until now, I'm thinking, are you sure I did it? But we did it, I tell you. Was it easy? No. It's a very painful experience. But then you see what is it for the country? Of course, it's painful, it's difficult. Well, but if one is trying to make amends, to try to work together, why not? And we did.
Dr. Sri, talking about governance and working with Dr. Mahathir, you were just at a Pakatan Harapan Presidential Council meeting this morning. Can you maybe tell us what's the decision-making process like, given that you are Ketua Umum of the Pakatan Harapan and there's the Prime Minister? Is it like you sit above the Prime Minister, or how does that work?
I think normally we see ourselves as more as a team. We are not too particular about this hierarchy, because Mahathir is chairman, so he chairs meeting. So I'm there on his right and the president on the left. So I think we went along. In fact, the moment he entered, I joked with him. I said, "This is my first meeting with you after 20 years." So everybody laughed. And yeah, it's like deja vu again. But the cultural and political environment in Pakatan is totally different from UMNO Barisan Nasional, because UMNO, it is that party that dictate the policies, and the others are normally more submissive and timid. In Pakatan, we were there as equals. Of course, we respect Mahathir for his experience, his age, and his leadership. But then people express their views rather openly. And he used to say that, as you compare this, the trouble here, everybody thinks that they can speak up their mind and have to wait for a long time. You joked about it, but he accepted the fact that the political environment has changed, the political landscape has changed. In fact, I was just giving some interviews this in the last few days about the fact that some more progressive and radical-minded people in Keadilan, more critical. I said, look, there's a system. If you want the young to be able to be effective, they must be allowed and given the space and latitude to articulate their views. I even had to remind some of my friends who were, so-called progressive or left or center. Well, the moment you come into government, you realize everybody has to follow the discipline. Then you get back to UMNO 2.0. So I think it's important to make people realize that, particularly when you deal with the young, you must give them the space and latitude. Oftentimes I disagree. I mean, it's not easy to disagree, to agree all the time for Nuriza to agree with me, my daughter. But she represents a different generation. And if you want them to succeed, you have to give them the space.
And in interviews, you have quite repeatedly tried to deflect or say that you don't want to be drawn into a timeline on when you will take power as PM. But of course, you will understand that it's a question on a lot of people's minds, on international investors' minds, how that transition of power is going to happen, given the fact that is your history with Dr. Mahathir.
Yeah, but that's history, and I think to Mahathir's credit too. I mean, he has given repeated assurances that the transition will be smooth and he will surrender. He's going to be 93. Don't imagine he will be. He served, as he said, up to 100. Now, why do I entertain the question of time frame? The moment you mention that as an agreement after 1 year or 2 years, then the 6 months before that, that Prime Minister is going to be lame duck. See? Even now, for example, because I'm supposed to assume office, so naturally political leaders come, they will call on him, they will insist to want to see me, because there's going to be a transition. But at least they know very well that I'm giving the latitude and the support to Mahathir to do, to govern without any sort of inhibition, so being, drawn to thinking that I've got to finish in 3 months or 6 months. So I said, as far as I'm concerned, I have the time because I want to be with the family a bit, although I have not been with the family in the last 2 weeks. I have to travel a bit. I'm going to London next week, then to Turkey, then probably sit down to write a bit and teach. Not a long reason. I'm going to Stanford, for example, or Georgetown University, probably short duration to try and polish my. After all, you'll be reading so much, you have to apply to them. So the students are going to suffer because this is one professor will be reading a few thousand books. He wants to pour in that few lectures. So good luck to my students.
I just push it a little bit further and confirm that you are intent on fighting the next election as Prime Minister.
I think that is said clearly by Tun Mahathir, and that consensus is there. By the time there's next elections, I'm supposed to lead. God willing, I'm in good health. I'm supposed to take charge. But people do keep on asking me, why don't I accept a time frame? I said it is not a wise move. If you want a leader, and this for now, Prime Minister Mahathir has to be effective. He's dismantling some of the remnants of the old regime. So it has to be effective. If he says that, wait, every move he has to consult Anwar, then he will not be, not only well regarded, but he will not be effective.
Have you contemplated any scenario where the planned handover of power might not happen? Has that entered your mind?
As you quoted, my daughter would say that Anwar is an irrepressible optimist. So I would view it in the positive, like the great Swami Vivekananda, who said, look at things in life positively and work towards it. Not to be naive, of course. I'm not. At the same time, you can't be cynical. You have a whole team that's committed to the cause. All the coalition partners, at least the vast majority, have agreed on the reform agenda and on the transition. So why do I worry so much? I should enjoy life.
You have led a movement that I think in the region, a lot of the opposition movements are seeking to overthrow what they call authoritarian regimes. They look to the Reformasi movement as a model. Can this model be used elsewhere in Southeast Asia?
I've always affirmed the view that a particular model and experience in a particular political environment cannot be just applied at random. But there are elements we can study. I studied the Eastern European experiment and all the reform measures from Gandhi to Mandela to Sun Yat-sen. Okay, we look at it, we study, we have a better understanding. Then you have to also apply to the new dictates, social media, for example, which was completely absent those days, and therefore you need to refer to the young for the expertise. Of course, the ideal is that you have to have the sustaining power, you have to have the courage of conviction, you have to have the tenacity to move on. But these things, of course, people can emulate. Not me necessarily, but I mean throughout the centuries, you have great statesmen, leaders, philosophers who tried to promote these views or teachings and have to endure peculiar hardships.
Dr. Sri, if I could pick up your point about Singapore and China being in the news with this new government and the new Prime Minister having to reiterate quite a number of times his views on China. What about your own views on China? How do you think Malaysia should conduct its bilateral relations with this rising power?
China is a major economic power, and I think we have to deal with it, and we must benefit from its economic might and trading and investments. I mean, the issue taken up by Mahathir is purely on some of the early arrangements with the former regime, particularly Datuk Seri Najib, that need to be probably relooked and revised. I think the general thinking is that we should use that opportunity to negotiate or renegotiate so that it's not perceived as being anti a country or prejudice against the interests of that particular country.
Do you think Mr. Najib hurt the sovereignty of Malaysia in trying to bring Malaysia closer under the diplomatic umbrella of China?
No, I think the issue is not just the relations with China, because the opposition or the in a sense, political rebellion against Najib was so widespread and pervasive that any deals that is perceived as done by him, for example, being exceedingly close to China in terms of business relations and investment. So people always are suspicious. This guy is perceived as not being clean. Why is he choosing particular companies and investing in a big way? What are the deals and the private deals? So I think there should not be any inhibition for the government now to relook at the agreement, and if it is clearly proper, transparent, a government cannot undo that. But otherwise, they should be given some space to look to what we believe are protecting the interests of the nation and its people.
Dr. Sri, if I could draw a comparison between you and Tun Dr. Mahathir's approach to foreign policy, you have been someone who's characterized as being, as it were, more pro-West compared to Tun Dr. Mahathir. But in the intervening years that you were behind bars, China has risen as quite a formidable power. I wonder if you could share your views on what are your biggest fears about China and your biggest hopes for this big neighbor that's in your backyard?
I think it's perception because I chaired the World Bank IMF Development Committee. So naturally you get to Washington in many of these deliberations, or to London and the capitals, but to discuss this. But my relations with China then, particularly during the era of Churongji when he was Deputy Prime Minister, was extremely close in terms of attracting investments and giving the confidence and looking for opportunities for Malaysians. I brought with me 200 over businessmen who thought that they should be given the exposure those days in the 1990s. As we say, China is a very important economy. It has invested large sums of money here, which would benefit us. But I think the Chinese, I'm sure, are smart enough to realize there's a change of government, a change of policies, and of course the perception of the Chinese being involved in these deals need to be cleared.
What do you mean by needs to be cleared?
Which means, are these deals transparent? Are the costs reasonable? Is there an arrangement between the previous regime and the company by siphoning off billions? Well, if it is not so, we don't know. But certainly, when it comes to costing, we have seen that the costing is sometimes slightly, sometimes drastically more than what we used to know or understand.
So would we be correct to summarize that your views on China are somewhat aligned with Tun Dr. Mahathir's?
Yes, I think on matters foreign policy, even in those years I was fighting against him, there was not really any dissension in terms of policy issues affecting the foreign policies or international relations. But then, as you know, there's a different emphasis here, because the Mahathir has already announced that he's going to looking specifically to Singapore and China, although investments are from all over the world.
Dr. Suri, if I could turn to the subject of race, there's been a lot of discussion about how the Malaysian electorate voted not according to racial lines in this election. I wonder if we could get your take on that, and whether you're persuaded by that notion that Malaysia is approaching a post-ethnic era or post-racial era.
Well, it has been there. For example, you look at the election results in 2013, you can see there's a multiracial wave in the West Coast. So the ethnic racist connotation issue has always been a weapon of the ruling party, UMNO. And this we realize. So naturally, in the opposition, among the opposition, regardless whether it's Keadilan, the Justice Party, or the AP or the others, you can always count, on the urban support. You can use any banner, but of course this time we use only one banner because the government refused to allow all the others, then landed with one banner. And that helps us enormously, precisely because people will not get too confused with the existence of too many banners in one coalition.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that the days of race-based politics are numbered?
It will take time, of course. The sensitivity is now. For example, now with the more liberal outlook and the media which is free, there is also a growing Malay concern. Is this a Chinese-dominated government? Are we going to do away with all the privileges that Malays have? That's why I thought it's a good caution. I was asked, for example, by a local television network, do I agree that the university, which is confined to the Malays, UITM, should be opened up to the non-Malays? My retort to that is that number one, we need to have a stable government. Number two, we have to have input which can help build up this nation. So I think that is multiracial by itself, other than, of course, parties which are multiracial. And what we need to also emphasize is the race card is being used by authoritarian regimes when they tend to become more irrelevant or corrupt.
But having said that, Dato' Sri, wouldn't you agree that PAS still wields considerable power, especially in the Northern Corridor, suggesting that there is a conservative base that they can tap upon?
Yes, because they were able to garner votes in the East Coast, but it has lost its prestige as a national party. Beyond the core PAS supporters and their centres, very few areas that they were able to penetrate.
Dato' Sri, Pakatan's victory has been lauded in so many ways, and all manner of adjectives have been used to describe how remarkable it has been. What do you think is the biggest challenge for Pakatan going forward?
Is to actualize and implement the promises, which including the main pillar is the rule of law. There is a consensus on that they need to do more. But there is also growing criticism because money is not pumped to allow them to be able to facilitate these programs.
Dato' Sri, one last question. You talked earlier about there's a danger of the people who are more left-leaning being circumscribed as Pakatan is now in government, and yet we must allow for those voices to be heard. But isn't there also a danger of the centre not being able to hold?
Well, I think for now, because the numbers, it is not a small majority that we have. It's a comfortable majority, close to two-thirds. I am not too particular about wanting a two-thirds for government. Let us work with a simple majority. But the majority is convincing. And we virtually control almost all state governments excepting for 2 or 3. So I think we're okay. Why I need to caution is that it's not only left of centre, but probably Islamists or progressives or those who have been activists for a long time. They must be reminded that their political landscape has changed. You must allow for or give some latitude for people to view. Because I've seen this initially. The moment you do give a differing view or criticism, people get uptight. This because it's a new experience. You are not used to government being criticized. And you can actually. I used to state that in the past, people say you don't have a freedom of speech. No, you can say, you can speak out. in the last regime, the time there is freedom of speech, but there's no freedom after speech.
Okay, Dr. Sri, thank you very much for giving us your time.